A war with Iran wouldn't just be fought by soldiers, it would be a direct assault on your wallet. We're not talking about a distant geopolitical chess match. We're talking about a scenario that could trigger record-high gas prices, empty store shelves, and an economic shock that would make past recessions feel like a tremor. This isn't just about foreign policy. It's about your job, your savings, and the price of literally everything you buy. We're going to trace the fallout step by step, from a single strategic choke point in the Middle East all the way back to your bank account. The first and most immediate impact of a major conflict with Iran wouldn't be felt in the halls of government, but at the gas pump. It hits what's called the hip pocket nerve, the one that gets everyone's attention. The reason is a narrow strip of water you've almost certainly heard of, the Strait of Hormuz. It is the world's most important oil choke point. About a fifth of the entire world's petroleum flows through this narrow passage every single day. That's around 20 million barrels daily. In a conflict, this strait would effectively close, not just from a physical blockade, but because insurance companies would refuse to cover the tankers sailing through a war zone. No insurance, no passage. The result? An immediate and catastrophic disruption to the global oil supply. In fact, the International Energy Agency has described a potential closure as possibly the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Instantly, the price of Brent crude oil would soar. Projections from analysts show it could surge past $120 or even $150 a barrel in a severe, prolonged crisis. For perspective, that price level alone threatens to push economies into recession, and that global price surge hits you directly. You'd see gas prices climbing daily. Forget a 10 or 20 cent jump. We could see the national average climb dramatically, potentially pushing past $4, $5, or even $6 a gallon nationwide, with much higher prices in states like California. The nightmare scenario of double-digit gas prices, once a far-fetched idea, suddenly becomes a talking point in a worst-case crisis. And it's not just gasoline. Diesel prices would climb even faster. That's the fuel that powers the trucks delivering our food, the trains moving goods, and the equipment that harvests our crops. The pain at the pump is just the first domino. That initial oil shock would trigger a devastating chain reaction through every part of the economy. First, let's talk about shipping. A conflict in the Persian Gulf doesn't just affect the Strait of Hormuz. When you combine that with existing instability in the Red Sea, you get what some experts call a dual choke point shipping crisis. While Hormuz is primarily an energy route, the regional chaos would snarl all maritime trade. Rerouting ships adds weeks and massive costs to every voyage. We're not just talking about oil tankers, but all sorts of global trade getting massively delayed and more expensive. Spot rates for shipping containers on major global routes could climb by 30% or more. And you can't just fly everything instead. Air freight gets hit just as hard. The Gulf is a vital hub for air cargo connecting Europe and Asia. Airspace closures would force planes onto longer routes, burning more of that now exorbitantly expensive jet fuel and reducing their cargo capacity. What does this logistical nightmare look like for you? It looks like empty store shelves reminiscent of the early pandemic, but supercharged by a massive energy crisis. First, you'd see shortages of goods that rely on complex global supply chains. For example, Qatar is a major producer of the world's helium, which is critical for making semiconductors and for medical MRI machines. Recent estimates suggest about a third of the global helium supply could be disrupted. Key manufacturing hubs in the region would see shipments hampered, triggering global order shifts and soaring costs for electronics. But then the crisis would hit the basics. The building blocks of our economy would start to crack. The Gulf region is a central hub for global agriculture, accounting for a massive share of the world's traded fertilizers, especially urea and ammonia. Some analyses show the region accounts for nearly half of the world's urea exports. A shutdown would cause fertilizer prices to spike. Combined with higher diesel costs for farmers, the cost of producing food would explode. We'd see it in the price of bread, corn, and meat. Higher transport costs mean higher prices for everything else on your grocery bill. Even the price of a can of soda could jump, as the price of aluminum, of which the Gulf is a notable producer, hits new highs. This is how a distant conflict detonates in your local supermarket. It's not one thing, it's everything, all at once. So, what would the broader impact look like if the war continues? We could face the return of a word that strikes fear into economists everywhere: stagflation. Stagflation is the toxic combination of a stagnant, shrinking economy with high unemployment and at the same time rampant inflation. It's the worst of all possible worlds, and it's what defined the economic misery of the 1970s. Here's how it could unfold. The oil price shock is, by itself, a massive inflationary force. But as we've seen, it's not just oil. It's food, shipping, and raw materials. It's a cost-push inflation wave hitting every single sector. Businesses facing higher costs for energy and transport would be forced to raise prices. At the same time, this shock would slam the brakes on economic growth. Faced with massive uncertainty and falling demand, businesses would pull back. They'd freeze hiring and cancel investments. Some economic models have warned that a disruption lasting just 6 months could be enough to sink the entire global economy into a full-blown recession. This puts central banks, like the Federal Reserve, in an impossible position. Their main tool to fight inflation is raising interest rates. But raising rates in a slowing economy can kill what little growth is left, sending unemployment soaring. They'd be trapped. Fight inflation and cause a deep recession, or try to stimulate growth and let inflation run wild, devaluing your savings. For you, this is a triple threat. Your cost of living would be skyrocketing, your job security would be at risk, and the value of your savings and your 401k would be evaporating as stock markets react to the crisis. We'd even see the impact on the housing market as uncertainty pushes mortgage rates higher, putting homeownership further out of reach. While the U.S. economy reeled, the impact on the Gulf region itself would be a systemic collapse. For decades, countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have built their entire economic model on the stable export of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. A war shatters that model. Imagine a country whose main source of income simply vanishes overnight. That's what would happen. With the strait closed, oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG exports would be stranded. Gulf nations would see their exports plummet. Major producers like Qatar Energy would be forced to declare force majeure, a legal term meaning they physically cannot fulfill their delivery contracts. The consequences would be swift and brutal. Some projections have suggested a sustained conflict could shrink the GDP of the most exposed countries by double digits in a single year, a level of economic devastation usually associated with state failure. But the crisis would go beyond just lost revenue. It would become a humanitarian issue. Many of these desert nations are critically dependent on imports for basic necessities like food. Even more frightening is their dependence on desalination plants for drinking water. In countries like Kuwait and Qatar, nearly all their drinking water comes from the sea. These large, stationary industrial sites could become vulnerable targets in a conflict, and any disruption could trigger a massive humanitarian crisis. The regional aviation sector, built around massive hubs like Dubai and Doha, would face a near-total shutdown. The region that branded itself as the crossroads of the world would be cut off from it. This regional collapse would have its own global repercussions. A breakdown of order in the world's most critical energy region would inject a level of fear into global markets that would dwarf the initial price shock. It would create a tsunami of instability, ensuring that even if the strait were to reopen, the world economy would bear the scars for years to come. The dominoes we've just described, from the gas pump to the grocery store, from Wall Street to the Arabian Gulf, paint a grim picture of a global economy on the brink. Understanding these connections is the first step. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss our next report. And let us know in the comments what economic impact worries you the most. So, what does this cascade of potential catastrophes really mean? It means that in our deeply interconnected world, there is no such thing as a faraway war. A conflict that begins with missiles can quickly become an economic war waged against every single one of us. The scenario we've outlined is not an exaggeration. It's a sober analysis based on the fundamental mechanics of our global energy and financial systems. It's a stress test that reveals just how fragile those systems are. The ultimate cost of a war with Iran wouldn't be measured just in military budgets, which could run into the hundreds of billions. The real cost would be measured in lost jobs, wiped out savings, and a global economic crisis that could take a generation to recover from. The conversation about war is too often confined to military strategy, but the economic devastation, the direct assault on the financial security of every American family, that is the catastrophe that too few are talking about. And it's the one we can least afford to ignore.